Good morning. I'm Maurice Crespi. I'm the managing partner of Schindler's Attorneys. I'm a co-founder. Schindler's are a co-founder of COBRA. COBRA was formed as a pro bono initiative with a view to assisting businesses that are in distress. The idea is to make use of as many professionals as possible on a pro bono basis to assist businesses who need assistance because they cannot afford to pay either business rescue practitioners' fees or attorneys' fees or accountant fees and the like. What we've also done is we've created a knowledge database in relation to any information that you may need. The database, we've been told, is one of the best in the country, if not the best. So you can have a look at that. The website is really, really useful. So we've done that. And what we're also doing is we setting up these webinars with a view to dealing with particular questions that you may have in relation to the topics. I say each day that it would be quite easy for us to merely pre-record a video and just play it on a daily basis. There'd be no point of a webinar unless you guys engage. So please engage. That's very, very, very important. We do have various targeted webinars during the week, so also look out for those. So I'm going to hand over to Marius van Rensburg. He is head of conveyancing. He's been my partner for almost 20 years at Schindler's Attorneys. He runs the department, a sizable department. I think there are about 30 staff members, and he's been at this for some time. So let's hear from you, Marius, if you can, hand over and give us your views. Thanks, Marius.
Right, morning everyone. Maurice, thanks very much. Thanks for having me, and it's good to see everyone here, and all my fellow panelists. I think that the topic of today is to talk about property and how it's been affected by COBRA and by the lockdown. So I'm going to give you guys a brief introduction from my point of view as to kind of where we are, and being a conveyancer, I'm going to give it to you, from a conveyancing point of view. So, in these times, I think that there's stuff that we know absolutely, and there's stuff that we can only speculate about as to what is going to happen going forward. So let's start with where we are from a property point of view and where we know we are. So the first thing, that the really good news is that the deeds offices have now opened. There was a lot of speculation as to when they were going to open, and there were various discussions around the deeds offices and how they were going to function. The good news is that I have lodged matters today in Pretoria deeds office and in Johannesburg deeds office. They're both accepting lodgements. So at least that process can get going, and that's the good news. Because anything that's in the pipeline or there was in the deeds office, we can now get those matters through and start registering those transfers. The city councils are operating with varying degrees. We are getting rates clearance figures that we applied for during the lockdown period, and it's important to understand the issue around the rates clearance figures, because the way the rates clearance figures system operates is that we apply for rates clearance figures, we pay the rates and taxes, electricity and water 120 days in advance. Then what happens is we pay the city council and they issue the rates clearance certificates. The current interpretation of the Municipal Systems Act is that certificate is valid for a period of 60 days from the date of issue. And this is sometimes a bit confusing, because on the certificate itself, it'll say valid until, and that date will be 120 days in advance. But the interpretation of the City Council, the deeds office, is it's valid for 60 days from the date of issue. So, for example, I have a certificate in the office that I'm thinking of in particular, where the certificate was issued, is valid until the end of June, but it was issued on the 24th of March. So it's only valid until the 25th of April. Now, of course, guys, this creates a problem. In that, because the lockdown period has been so extended, a lot of our rates clearance certificates have actually expired. And this means that there's matters which we would like to lodge, we'd like to register, but the rates clearances are expired. So that's why my second point is talking about the city councils. We have to have the city councils operating to get the rates clearances done. But as I say, those are now starting to operate, and we're hoping to get our first rates clearances pretty soon. And then from a conveyancing point of view, from a seller point of view, and in particular from an estate agent point of view, we can start to see the cash flow rolling through again. So that's kind of where we are with the deeds officers. And just so I can just put a bit of detail into this. The other trick, of course, is the issues around moving. That's the other important element, and I think effect of the lockdown and COVID on the property sector, is that until the regulations were published, that the new regulations on the 7th of May, you couldn't move house. So people who were rentals and their rentals ended, they weren't able to move house. If you enter into a new lease agreement, you can't move house. So those regulations have now been published, and the moving is a very limited moving. So what the regulations say is that if you entered into a lease agreement before or during the lockdown period, you can move. The lockdown period is defined in the disaster management regulations as the 27th of March until the 30th of April. So you have to enter a lease agreement in that period. So it's pretty limited. The other circumstances you can move is if you're transfer registered before the lockdown period, i.e. up until the 26th of April. Then you can move as well. If you want to move, well, you must go to the police station, you must use Form L, you must present them with all the supporting documentation, and you must get a permit. And I can assure you we've had 100 questions about can we move outside of that, and there's a whole bunch of scenarios that probably arguably fall within the regulations, but they don't strictly fall within the written word of the regulations. And the result of which is there is a bit of confusion. What we've said to people is, take your documentation, take the form. We've actually distributed that form to all our clients. Go to the form and try and get authorization from the police. At the end of the day, they are the people that can give something, tell you whether you can move or not. If you get the permit based on your documentation, you get the permit and you can move. So that's I think as a certainty point of view, that's where we are. If we move slightly away from that and we start talking about more speculative issues, and that is, well, what is the ultimate effect going to be on the of the lockdown and of this COVID pandemic on the property market? And I think that's a speculative question. And if I could start at this point to try and give an answer to that and tell you that during the lockdown period, we've probably received 20 to 25% of our normal instructions. And that varies up and down. Some days it'll go up as much as 30% of our normal instructions, but we have been receiving a number of instructions. And to be frank, I've been surprised. I've been surprised at the appetite for property that still exists in the market. And I talk to estate agents and property people every single day. And people are really looking forward to the end of the lockdown for obvious reasons. Because once this lockdown ends, once lockdown goes into level 2 or 3, then the agents can start operating, and I think that there is going to be some pent-up demand for property. I certainly don't see the property market collapsing in its entirety, and I see that there will be there will be a lot of activity. I mean, I don't think it'll be the normal activity that we've seen over the last couple of years. And of course, as you well know, that the property market's been struggling as it is. But I'm anticipating some pent-up demand to be released as soon as we can start operating. As you guys know, one of the issues with operating is that the estate agents at this stage, for commercial property estate agents, are in level 3, and then the residential realtors are in level 2. There's been a lot of submissions made to government, a lot of pressure put on government, and we're really hoping that the levels will either move from 4 to 3, and then we're hoping that the real estate agents will move from 2 to 3 and up to 4 potentially, so they can start operating. Because the agents are, of course, the lifeblood of where we are, and they're the ones who start the value chain and essentially provide the whole value chain of work. But in terms of where we're going to go in the future, as I say, speculative. But there are a lot of positives. Interest rates are the lowest that they've been in 60 years. Property prices have fallen, so it's going to create a nice market for people to go out and buy. And on the slightly more negative side, people are under financial stress, but that does create opportunities for those who want to enter the property market. So those people under financial stress who are going to sell to access to capital, well, they'll become our sellers and our willing sellers, and we'll find buyers for those people. I think that's really a summary from me. I'm not sure if I know that I've got Otisha, Dave, Peter, Ian, Mark, Gary, Emma, and I've got Dean. And I don't know if anyone else has an additional comment.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there. What do you envisage in relation to distressed properties and the effect of forced sales on the property market? Has there been any activity in relation to, have you heard anything around the bank's attitude? Because I heard through Chantal Gladwin, in fact, she mentioned last night, she's my partner and she's dealing with some of the banks, and apparently they're looking at not going the forced sale route, but rather implementing a system where they work with clients to sell. Do you know anything about that, firstly?
I haven't heard anything specific, but as what happened in the 2008 recession, what the banks do is, the banks enter into a forced sale process only from an absolute necessity. The banks are not in the business of taking people's property. They don't want to own your property. What they want to do is they want to get paid the bond installment that's due, and if the bond installment can't be paid, well, they want to assist parties. So what we found in the 2008 recession, and I'm absolutely certain we'll find it here as well, is that the banks all generate a distress sale program, and the different banks have different distress sale programs. And of course, we actually held a webinar on this about 2 weeks ago, and we published some written articles on this as well. And our view is that if sellers find themselves in distress, what they need to do is go and speak to their banks as soon as possible, because there are massive advantages for getting into those distress sale programs. And then the first and immediate advantage, of course, is that it stops legal action against that seller. So you engage with the bank, you discuss with the bank, you enter into their program, they stop taking legal action against you because now there's a plan to resolve the issue that's arisen. And that plan really involves valuing your property, having an agreement where we put it on the market in an orderly way and agree to accept a market-related price. And then, of course, there's often other advantages, such as the banks often write off a portion of the interest, they assist you with your rates and taxes, they appoint attorneys and agents to help you through that process. So there is lots of help that can be done. But I think people need to understand that banks don't want to own your property. And what I do find is that often sellers get into trouble, and they're overly optimistic and they don't speak to the banks early enough. And I think early intervention is always important in these things.
No, certainly. And I know you're not that involved in rentals. Can you comment? Because otherwise I'll give some insight on rentals. Have you heard anything? Have you read anything on what the anticipated rental market will be in, let's say, 6-12 months' time? My view and my hope is that in 6 to 12 months' time, that our property market would hopefully have normalized to a large degree. But there's always pushes and pulls in every market, and I think it's going to be exactly the same in the rental market. So what's going to happen post where people get allowed to move, and even now with these limited instances of people allowed to move, there's lots of need for people to, for example, downgrade or change their circumstances, and the discussions from the agents that we're dealing with is that there is a lot of activity in the rental market. There's people who want to view houses, who want to go and move, and they simply can't. So once they hopefully they will extend these regulations to allow more freedom of movement, and then hopefully allow the agents to participate as well. I think there's going to be a flurry of activity where people move out of their properties, enter into new lease agreements. There's obviously going to be pressure on the monthly rental amounts.
And I think landlords are going to have to be realistic in regard to the rentals that they can expect going forward. And maybe you'll find a more stringent process in terms of vetting clients. It's the same as the banks. The banks are going through a process with mortgage bonds, and they're reviewing all the existing mortgage bonds, and they're re-looking at their clients who've taken mortgage bonds, looking at their situations, looking at the industry, and I've even heard the banks are looking at the companies that they work for to see what their financial stability is. And I suppose the same thing will happen with rentals. We'll be scrutinizing our tenants, but we also have to be realistic on those rentals and be prepared to accept a lower rental. It's the same sort of situation. I get 2-3 calls a day from either agents or tenants or landlords where the tenants simply can't pay the rent. They don't have the money. And different landlords are taking different approaches. Some are not prepared to face reality that their tenants can't pay the rent, and they're wanting to place their tenants in breach, which is their right. But the vast majority of landlords are looking at the situation realistically, and, for example, saying to their tenants, okay, please pay the rates and tax and the levies, at least allow me to cover those costs, and then let's make a plan for the rental at a later stage.
Yeah, I just want to mention, there's been a lot of activity in COBRA, and what we've found with rentals is that landlords are generally reasonable, and 2 approaches have been adopted. You have landlords who are aggressively threatening to sue, and then you have landlords who are prepared to cooperate and enter into a dialogue. And those are the ones who actually get paid. A lot of tenants are actually taking a principled position, and they're saying, well, I'm not going to pay if you're going to be unreasonable. It's COVID-19, it's an act of God. Now be reasonable. So there is this kind of tension. And Marius, you're not that involved in COBRA, but I need to mention to everybody out there that that's what COBRA does, is to actually mediate that tension and to try and get landlords to agree to a lower rental. But then in turn, what COBRA does is we take those landlords and we put them into the COBRA ecosystem, and then we in turn deal with their creditors. And by doing that, we go all the way up to the bank. So that's quite important. The point I wanted to make was I've been reading quite a bit on rentals, and what some people suspect is that the lower end of the rental market is actually going to be quite buoyant, whereas the upper end, so properties that exceed, let's say, 1.2 million in value, those are going to start taking strain. Whereas because there's going to be a greater demand for the lower end, that it would be buoyant. Can you comment on that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yesterday I read an article around the car market and what's happening in the second-hand car market, and they were saying that there's a massive demand for the purchase of motor vehicles under 50,000 rand. And when people go into financial stressful times, it's the same with their cars as with their property. What they want to try and do is reduce their monthly expenses so that they can meet their general expenses. So like people want to maybe get rid of a more expensive car, go to a cheaper car. It's more than likely that you're going to find that people in rentals are going to do exactly the same thing. Rather move from a more expensive rental to a cheaper rental, see through a difficult patch, and then move on. And I think that over the last year or two, there's been massive pressure on the upper rental side anyway. So if you take, for example, a property in one of our more expensive estates, you take a property worth 5 or 8 million rand. Those properties maybe get 0.5, 0.6% of the rentals, whereas if you're looking at a £1 million property, you're more likely to get 0.7, 0.8%. So there's always been more pressure on the high end of the market, and I think that's going to become exacerbated as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a point I was actually wanting to make, but it's in my mind. I'll get back to it. I want to jump to one of the other panelists. Actually, let me go back to the point. I actually wanted to say that there are a lot of agents who are attendees. So let me just explain what COBRA does. We've got a whole host of panelists who are experts in assisting businesses in doing whatever they need to do to come right through COVID. And one of the aspects that really, really clever people at COBRA have been looking at is ways to pivot businesses. So in other words, you take your existing model and you see how you can adapt that existing model to the new post-COVID climate. And this, I guess, is a take-home, Marius. It's a take-home in the sense that if we're looking at pivoting and you're following COBRA's advice, and I was rude, I didn't introduce my panelists, I will now, but we have engaged business turnaround. If they were to come in and pivot, what would they say to the agencies? That presumably say to the agencies, look, let's look at the new target market. If rentals are going to be buoyant and it's going to be the lower level, well, that's where you go start marketing yourself. And I just want to, I'll ask Peter. Peter, are you on? Ian?
Sorry, Maurice, I was on mute. Yes, I'm on.
Okay, Peter. So just on the pivoting, we've got a lot of agents who are on, who naturally they're distressed. And they're distressed because of the property market and stuff. And I just want to give some insight, because this is partly about COBRA, about how you'd assist those businesses. What would you look at? So from a property perspective, and what would Engage Turnaround start doing the moment a agency comes into COBRA to seek help, to negotiate with the landlord, or to negotiate with the bank? Peter?
Maurice, yes, good morning, everybody. I mean, obviously, the most critical thing in a time like this is cash. So please do hang on to your cash. The tips that you can follow, for example, it's late now in the lockdown, and we're hopefully slowly coming out of it. But do not force your staff, if you've got agents working with you, to take their leave at this time, because you've still got to pay them. Rather negotiate a reduction in salary. So it's just an example of the sort of things we would do to try and reduce costs. We're not hugely in favor of let's just cut costs wherever we can, because what happens then is, it's all good and well to start cutting out the fat, but you do start cutting into the muscle eventually, and that threatens the very existence of the business. Now, one of the things that property agents have as a flexibility is that obviously agents are on a commission basis. So if it's a larger franchise with a number of individual agents, then it's predominantly commission based. So the expense of your commissions and your staff is already variable, i.e. attached to your turnover. If it isn't the case, that's what we also try and do. We would try and get staff to agree to taking a percentage of turnover as their salary. And how this would work, for example, you say at the moment salaries represent, let's for argument's sake, 20% of our sales. We're going to put 20% of our sales into a pot every month, and we'll distribute that to the staff in relation to their existing salary. So, and staff are generally quite open to that type of structure, because at least they're keeping their jobs. The other advantage of agents have, of course, is they are fleet of foot. Unless it's a massive franchise agency, you're not looking at huge investment in bricks and mortar. People can work from home, can easily work from home, with a cell phone and a laptop and an agent and a car, an agent can do their job. So that, to try and maximize that is not easy, because as Marius was just saying, it's always driven by the market, and if the market's not there. But then, Maurice, you made an important point. I mean, people who are in the top category of property prices in the biggest centers, and in private properties I'm talking about, then do try and look to see where you can expand into areas where you're going to find more affordable, more reasonable properties. Because as Marius rightly said, and I've read about this extensively, people will start downgrading, and your properties start, the buoyancy, as exactly as Marius's example in the used car market, the buoyancy in the lower end market is far higher. Commercial, also interesting, what tends to happen in the commercial property market, people downsize, they also downgrade. So the guy that's currently sitting in the middle of Sandton might be quite prepared to go into the middle of Randburg in his offices. So what you find is the demand increases for the less salubrious addresses and more into the outlying areas. If somebody's in the middle of Johannesburg, they might be quite happy to move their offices to Roodepoort or Boksburg. So you'll find rentals in that area stabilize. But I think what for the agents that are in the letting and administration market, rentals will come down. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Companies will fold. They're going to they'll be forced to cancel their leases, or hopefully, and if they're in, rescue or in the COBRA system, we've managed to negotiate a reduction in rental for them. But the very fact of the matter is that rentals are going to be coming down. So returns are going to be coming down. I mean, we've seen a reduction in commercial and residential returns for the investor market over many years now. But I suspect we're going to see even lower returns, down at the 5% and below in the commercial market, which would certainly be something that we haven't seen for a while. So I think, adapt to that. The other thing that I've been saying to companies is, whatever you're assuming, and Marius talked about the release of private versus commercial property versus the levels of unlocking, if we like. Assume the worst. So assume that if you're in the private residential market, you're going to be up and running by, let's say, 30th of September. I've heard a number of people say that's when we're expecting peak. But if you want to be very conservative, then we're into next year. And plan accordingly. Do not assume that, everything's going to, first of all, be fine and hunky-dory next month. It's going to take time. And then secondly, I think it creates for a little bit out-the-box creative thinking. How can you change your entire business model? Because life is not going to be the same. I was reading an article earlier that, by Richard Bowe, who claims that we're in a liminal period. And what is a liminal period? It's a space where we've never been before. And the uncertainty is there. And one of his pieces of advice is, when uncertainty is there and you're not too sure what's going to happen, very often it's very good to do nothing. Now, that's very fine and good and well if you're talking about your own personal survival. But, when you've got a business and you've got family to feed, it's not that easy to do. So do try and think laterally. Think about, if you're not, for example, in the management area at the moment, then go into the management area, see if you can get into that space from the rental point of view and managing complexes, etc., in private. The one, and I'm going to stop now, but a good question that I have I think it's a good question for Marius. One of the things that concerns me is the listed property market and the REITs, because I don't think we're going to see some of the big shopping malls start faltering. Now, being an ex-banker and somebody that's used to mitigating risk, in banking, what you always do, if you're into the property development arena, you always, in your risk mitigation, are looking at alternative uses. So, for example, a hotel can quite easily be turned into a block of flats, etc. We've seen that happen in South Africa on a number of occasions. For example, a gym is a very difficult thing if it's got a swimming pool in the middle of it to convert that into alternative use. But when you start thinking of a waterfront, Sandton City, Fourways Mall, Cresta, these are massive bricks and mortar establishment, massive investments to turn to alternative use. And Marius, I know I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but have you got any view of what's likely to happen to those? I think the regional shopping centres will survive, because most of us are quite happy to go down to our local shop and enter a Spar shop, but we're not tempted to move into the mall where there's, possibility of infection, and really all we want to do is get our groceries and get out of there. Marius, is that a bit unfair to put you on the spot on that?
No, I think you're right. I think these guys will have to get creative. And just when you mentioned that, Peter, I have a friend who has some interest in some pharmacies, and he tells me that the pharmacies within the massive shopping centres are already struggling because people are less inclined to go into actual shopping centres. Whereas the sort of local pharmacies that are, in sort of strip malls as such, people can park their car, get out, and just simply walk into the pharmacy and walk out. They're doing far better. And I assume that would go for the other retailers as well, like the Spars and the small Pick and Pays and the Checkers. So yeah, I think that both of those sectors are going to come under pressure, and I suppose it depends on what the ultimate product is. But you're right; those guys are going to really get creative, see what they can do with their markets. I mean, and you're right. Some of the hotels, for example, have stopped taking normal guests, and they're now using them as quarantine sites. So people will have to get creative in the commercial sphere as well.
Yeah, I mean, we ourselves have determined as Schindlers that there's a good chance we won't need as much space because working from home is working. So what we're looking at is repurposing the space, and that's where the creativity would necessarily come in. Marius, tell me, I saw somewhere that apparently the banks are processing bond applications despite offers not being signed.
Yeah, I'm glad you remind me of that. You know, I appreciate that because I think that's a very good point. And we're getting a lot of questions. And Mark Blankenberg is also a panelist here today. We discussed this morning. You know, there's a lot of confusion around what people can and can't do. And remember that when it comes to sale of immovable property, in order to enter into a valid sale agreement, it must be signed in pen. You know, a proper signature, not a digital signature, not an electronic signature, and that's a specific exclusion from the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act. So, if you want to enter an agreement to sell to comply with the Alienation of Land Act and to not fall foul of the other legislation, you have to physically sign by hand. And you know, obviously, some people want to sell their properties, they want to buy property, but they don't have access to a printer. And the banks are actually accepting bond applications of unsigned agreements. And what they'll do is they'll make it a condition of the bond that's ultimately granted that offer to purchase be signed. So what we also find is some people, what they do is they're inserting electronic signatures onto their agreement, which doesn't strictly comply with the legislation, but it's being done and it's been accepted by the banks. So, you know, the banks have actually been, and so on the topic of the banks have actually been processing bond applications, you know, largely throughout the lockdown process. There have been some restrictions here and there. At one stage, they weren't accepting applications from self-employed people, and I think that's now changed. There was also some limits with regards to the bank's ability to go and do valuations. So where they could do the desktop valuation, they would do desktop valuations, for example, for sectional title units. But on freehold immovable properties, they need to do the actual valuations. That's also changing. I think the majority of banks have now indicated that they can go and do those valuations. So, you know, those processes are continuing, and you know, the agents who are creative are really making a plan, and they're talking to us every day for advice on how to do things. But you know, they're submitting unsigned offers to purchase. We're getting bond approvals from the banks, and of course, now that lockdown is over for conveyances, you know, we are seeing clients every single day to sign documents in our office, and we're going out to see clients. So we're really trying to get it back to business as usual as much as we can. Mark, did you have a comment there?
Hi guys, yeah, just to add on to that. So another way that another creative process that people are starting to use at the moment is they're signing agreements of sale where if the purchaser has not viewed the property, it's just subject to them viewing the property when they are able to after lockdown. But the bank will still process that bond application. They can still send I think they are sending evaluators out now. That's what somebody mentioned to me. I haven't actually heard that from a bank, but that's what an agent advised me, is that evaluators are going out. So the bond process can start now, and then obviously the buyer can do the inspection once they are legally able to. I mean, look, I don't think it's very common, but it is another option for people to take.
Yeah.
Right. Marius, there's a question. Can you comment on payment of commission earned before lockdown and monthly commission earned in management of property from employers? By Jim. Thanks, Jim. And we want more questions, please. Sorry, who just spoke was Mark Blankenberg. He's also a conveyancing partner at Schindlers Attorneys. Let me just introduce everybody because I missed that. The panelists today are Marius van Rensburg, Mark Blankenberg, Peter Gordon. He's engaged business turnaround, but also Crest Capital. I will be asking him soon just to give his views in relation to the tension between low interest rates and rentals. I'll get to that soon. Then we have Gary Barachowitz. He's my partner at Schindlers Attorneys. Dave Loxton, he's a COBRA member. He's Africa Forensics. He's been assisting, he's also a lawyer, and he's been assisting on COBRA with pro bono work. Ian Fleming, he's the CEO of Engaged. Emma Marseille, she's IQ Business Group. Dominique Lloyd is Schindlers Attorneys. Dean Wright, Schindlers Attorneys. Artisha IQ, and Grant Hallowell, Engaged. So just over to you. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. Back to you, Marius, on the question.
Thanks, Maurice. Jim, yeah, thanks for the question. It's appreciated, guys. Yeah, please post all your questions if you've got any. We'd be happy to answer them while we're all together. So, just in regard to the question from Jim, I'm going to just categorize it into two categories. One is, because I'm not sure what commission has been spoken about. One is rental commission and one is sales commission. So, just let's start with sales commission. Sales commission, of course, earned once you enter into agreement and you fulfilled all suspensive conditions. But in terms of a standard sales agreement, that commission is only payable on registration or transfer. So, of course, that's part of the good news that I started with, is that the deeds office is opening. We started to put stuff back in the deeds office. So if you due to be a commission arising from a sale that's going to register, if it registers, you'll be entitled to your commission. We have dealt with many of the bridging finance companies. Many agents are financially stressed. If they've done deals and those deals have met certain criteria, the bridging finance companies are assisting them with the advancement of commission, and we are signing off those letters of undertaking on a fairly regular basis. And that's an option if you're a sales agent. With regard to rental commissions, if you're entitled to a commission from, for example, the management of a property, well, then you continue to be entitled to that commission. I mean, it does depend on the terms of your management agreement, and to the extent that your tenant doesn't pay rent, well, you'll have to have a discussion with your landlord. In most cases, you'd be entitled to earn your fee, but of course, your fee may be dependent on the money coming in. We've had a number of scenarios where lease agreements have been entered into, for example, just prior to the lockdown, and the tenant, for example, hasn't been able to move in because of the lockdown. Now we have the new regulations. The tenants are now able to move into that property, and the tenants are now being approached to say, well, you enter into a lease agreement, you pay your deposit, but you haven't moved in. Now you can move in, go to the police station, and get your permit. And because of changed circumstances and financial stress of people, some of the tenants are saying, well, we can no longer afford the rental because we don't have a job. The question I, for example, had yesterday from an agent was, well, am I still entitled to my commission? And my answer was, you are entitled to a commission. Your commission is earned, generally speaking, dependent on the rental agreement, but generally speaking, your commission is earned once both parties sign the rental agreement, and then once the deposit is paid, the deposit of the first month's rent comes, or your commission comes from that. The fact that the parties decide not to continue with the lease or want to cancel the lease, in terms of the agreement, doesn't mean you're not entitled to your commission. I think you are entitled to your commission still. So, Gemma, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Maurice. Peter, I don't think I properly explained myself earlier on. So what I'm referring to is interest rates are low. Low interest rates mean that people will think carefully as to whether to rent or to buy. So that possibly would lead to an increase in property sales, and that would put pressure on rentals. Do you have any views on that? Because there is a glimmer of hope that, in fact, the low interest rates could actually be another important factor, and that we may, in fact, see a surge in sales.
Maurice, yes, look, obviously these two separate markets here, isn't there? There's the investor market, and then there's the occupier market. So the occupier market, if in the residential sector, you're going to see, as Maurice rightly said at the beginning, some downgrading of property. So people will want to be selling out of, higher valued property with obviously higher mortgages, notwithstanding the cut in interest rates to where they are at the moment. So there's going to be a downward pressure in the middle to upper value properties, residential, and an increasing demand in the lower end. Broadly, the same applies to the commercial sector, subject to what I was saying earlier, with possible increases in outlying areas to the main urban centres, and an exit from the sort of centres or the preferred addresses in those centres. But now, obviously, in the investor market, it's quite interesting. And I mean, the property market will generally follow the South African bond market. Now, people often get confused with bond returns. If you've got a South African RSA government bond and it's trading at 100 Rand and it's a fixed rate at, say, let's 6%, that's 6 Rand a year that you're earning on your 100 Rand bond. government bond. But if those bonds are in oversupply because people are exiting South Africa, for example, because of a downgrade, then the price of those bonds starts dropping. So people are not prepared to pay 100 Rand, they're only prepared to pay 90 Rand. But the interest token is still based on the face value of the bond. So you're still getting 6 Rand as interest. So now it's 6 Rand over 90. So in that simple example, your returns go up, and exactly the same happens in the property market. As interest rates come down, people are tempted to invest in properties. And I'm now talking about the investor community, because it's cheaper to acquire the property. And as Marius rightly said, there's going to be some bargains to be had at the moment. So those guys are looking for a bargain property at a lower interest rate. If, however, they can keep their rentals at a similar or only slightly reduced level from what they were before, and remember there's pressure on rentals because people can't afford rentals, so they're looking to cut their costs, then there is a possibility returns will go up. And as those returns go up, so the market, it's all dictated by the market. So then the market creates a pressure. People are after properties, and hence your property prices go up. As property prices are going up, if your rentals don't go up, your returns start dropping. So, you know, in the heydays, pre-2007, in this country, where property prices were at a fairly high level, people had entered the market at the peak, suffered for many years after that because there was a collapse. So people that entered, and as Marius rightly said, it's not so we've seen a very buoyant market, commercial or residential, over the last few years, well, over the last 10 years, to be honest. You know, during that period, properties have been a bit depressed, but if somebody was acquiring a Sandhurst or a Hyde Park property or a Landudno property at that peak and is now finding pressure because either the tenants are unable to afford their huge rental or their huge mortgage cost, notwithstanding a reduction in rates, and having to bail, your return immediately starts dropping because you're not going to get the same rental as before. So it's a volatile situation. Now, what happens in volatility, as any market trader will tell you, is that's when you make super profits and where the opportunities lie. So, you know, for example, I said earlier, thinking out the box, if you're a property agent at the moment and you have some cash, and as I said earlier, subject to hanging onto the cash as long as you can to make sure that you can survive through the business. But if you have got some equity available to invest and you find those bargains, and of course it is an attraction if you're an agent, because you do, first of all, understand the property market in your given area, and you will know if you're looking at a bargain. So there's an opportunity for agents to, if they've got the cash, to either become investors or to start advising potential investors and make contact with people that are interested in investing in property. And most certainly, Maurice, there will be those people because bargains are available at the moment. And if you know those people, keep in contact with them. Whereas before you were trying to sell properties, now, you know, to a matchmaking, now you're taking portfolios to potential investors to buy up, especially in the commercial area, because there will still be people who are wishing to invest in commercial property. Is that covered, Maurice? I think
that was a great overview of your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
You know, Peter, you just made me think now as you're talking, and there's two things I want to mention. And first, if you pick up any property investment book, it'll tell you that, you know, in order to be successful in property, you need to get close to the estate agents. So, you know, if you're looking to find a bargain, or you're looking to find the good properties, you know, once they post it onto the property websites, you know, that's probably past the sell-by date. And if you have a good relationship with your estate agent, you know, and a good relationship in that they can bring to you those deals, there's massive value in that. And you know, the other thing I want to mention is that if we take away all the negatives and the misery that's created by the lockdown and by this virus, you know, I think we're in for a fascinating time going forward. You know, if you think about the articles that were written pre-lockdown around the effect of mobility and the effect of millennials on the property market, and how it affects property prices, it's going to be very interesting. And take this as an example. You know, if we're going to work on the assumption that people are going to realize that people can work from home, and that it's not as hard as we thought, it's not as impossible as we thought. So previously, you would be prepared to pay for a 1 bed or 2 bed apartment in the middle of Sandton 2.5 or 3 million rand, whereas if you wanted to compromise and you're prepared to travel a bit further, you would go to Rand Park Ridge, or you would go to Edenvale, and you'd spend 2 or 2.5 million rand, and you'd find a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, or 3-bedroom house with a full garden. Now, is the market going to be turned on its head in the future? Will those outlying areas now become more attractive because people don't have to travel in every single day? So we could find that because of the change in dynamic in the way we work, the property dynamic is going to change with it. And Peter, I agree with you and Maurice exactly that it's all about strategizing and talking to the right people. And if you're a property owner right now, or you're an agent, you need to think out the box. You need to assess where the market is and go and try and find the sweet spots and market yourself and your properties into those sweet spots where you think that there'll be opportunities.
I have a comment that was posted, which I'll pull up, which I actually want to deal with in a different way. I'd like to, as you get freestyle rapping, music rapping, I'd like to do a freestyle COBRA think tank session with the COBRA team. I need to mention the IQ Business Group. They are specialist innovators. They come up with all kinds of solutions when it comes to businesses in distress. So we had a comment. Now I cannot find it. It was in the chat. That's all good and well to scale down, but if people are under pressure, who is going to purchase those properties when there won't be buyers at the higher levels? So now let's pretend that we now, as COBRA, we are faced with this problem, and now we have to assist in looking how can we turn this business around? How can we pivot the business model? Now, Peter, the first thing I identified there is that there's the people under pressure. So we have financial pressure. We have an agency, a state agency who needs to come up with money. We have who is going to purchase those properties. So we have a problem with buyers because they can't presently afford. And there won't be buyers at the higher levels. Peter, I'm just going to, as I said, freestyle. What about if we create a new product? What if we call the product an option? So estate agents now create an option. We get Schindler's attorneys to do this for them. We do it on a pro bono basis. And what agencies do now is they sell options. They don't sell properties. They sell options to buy properties. What have we identified here? We know that we have financially distressed people. So people need money. Okay? So there's a market now that we've identified of people who need money. But you guys are estate agents. So how on earth do you target people who need money? Or what if people buy options to buy properties from those individuals? So in other words, I'll say, look, you need 100,000 rands. Here's 100,000 rands. If you pay me back in 12 months with interest, cool, okay? But otherwise, I have an option to buy your property at a distressed price. So now what we've done is we've created a brand new product for agencies. And as I said, as COBRA, we can try to create that for the agencies out there. And you guys can try selling options. We've ticked every single one of these boxes. So that's my freestyle attempt at pivoting. Peter, can you comment on that?
Mauricio, look, I mean, it would be, well, first of all, let's say options vis-a-vis property are not new. It's a classic instrument when it comes to your, if you think of the early 1990s into the early 2000s, where every Tom, Dick and Harry who owned a farm or a large piece of property was converting it into either a golf course, an old age home, or some sort of lifestyle establishment. Now, if you're a developer, what do? You don't want to incur the immediate cost of acquiring the property, so you buy an option. And so it is a fairly common feature in the developer community to take option on property. And obviously it's an option subject to the developer raising the funding, getting the planning permissions, etc., and without laying out the cash on day one. There's no reason from a market point of view, there might well be a reason, and you guys are better placed to answer it than I am on the legal probity of the thing. But you can create a financial instrument. Somebody can sell an option. But now you must also think if you're talking private residence, there's going to be the emotional issue and the fear of risk. If you're selling an option, does the option then give the option holder the right to occupancy? So that would be quite a challenge, because if you think of a lease sometimes has an option clause in it, that the tenant has the option on a first refusal basis to buy the property at the end of the lease. So, but then you've got a lease covering your occupancy. So I'm not too sure, Maurice, what you were thinking, but I mean, there's no reason why, and it would be attractive to the investor market, because it's, because we're a capitalist society. One mustn't forget, and I'm a firm believer in market dynamics. So the market will regulate itself. Prices do regulate in terms of supply and demand. Simple as that. Obviously, and occasionally in the market, there's government interference, and that creates a bit of a falsity in the market. And we've had quite a few of those in the last 20, 30, 40 years in South Africa. But by and large, the market will find its mean. Now, if there's a pressure on the property investment companies, and you might find one of the REITs or one of the listed entities, or just privately held private equity funds that are holding property, they might start falling apart. And that's because the returns are not there, because they've no longer got any tenants, worst case scenario. Now, if that happens, we mustn't assume that this is now going to be dumped and almost be under the liquidator's hammer to sell at a fire sale value. Because there's still, remember what's happened in this country over the last 10 difficult years, is that people are sitting on money. A lot of larger corporates, one of the complaints by the government is that people weren't investing in infrastructure, weren't investing in capital equipment, because companies were uncertain of the future under the previous regime, and therefore were sitting on cash. So there's a fair amount of cash in the system, in the corporate environment, and in private hands. The private high net wealth individuals, the life officers, are doing relatively well at the moment. So with that in mind, the available funds are there. And that's why I was alluding earlier to in the property business, if agents and Marius supported the view, agents know where the bargains are. And if you're finding that you can put a portfolio together, you might find a small block of flats or a small townhouse complex where you have the ability to sell the entire complex. I think the investors are going to be there. Now, whether that's on an option basis, as I say, occupancy.
No, let me clarify, because this was about pivoting, where I was going, and creativity in relation to pivoting. So I'll tell you where I was coming from. I've in the last 20 years have had quite a few matters where you had somebody who's in desperate need of money, who has a house, and you have somebody who has a lot of money who wants to invest. So what happens, and I'll give you another example, so it's another pivoting, is the person says, I will buy your property from you at a bargain. So let's say it's 2 million rands, but the property value is 4 million rands. If you pay me back the 2 million rands, then you have an option to take the property back, but with a nice interest rate. So what you've done there is estate agents can actually broker financial deals and get the transfers in relation to the financial transaction, because you need a transfer to transfer the property, and then the option is to take it back when the funds have been settled. There's one caveat to that, is that it's been recognized in our law that you can have creditors take advantage of debtors who are desperate. It's a form of economic duress, and the courts have said these transactions are lawful so long as they're not unconscionable, immoral, and against public policy. So just to run through it again, because this is a pivoting, somebody needs money, they own a house. You find an investor, the investor says, fine, I'll buy the house at a bargain, takes transfer of the house, you've made your commission. Now what happens is, if the seller of the house has money to settle what he borrowed. He settles it and takes the house back, so you get a second transfer over there. Or if he's unable to pay it, the purchaser stroke investor would keep the property in lieu of being repaid. So that's where I was going. And where I was going is that the creativity that one finds in COBRA with the brains and the likes of IQ Business Group. This is one freestyle think session that we've just had over the last 5 minutes in relation to a question. And that's just I'm trying to illustrate what COBRA is about. So I think that concludes today's session. If you need more information, please do not hesitate to email either Schindler's or to email COBRA at info@cobra.org.za. The website's www.cobra.org.za. The site has a wealth of information on it, so please make use of that. As I said, we have these webinars daily. If you want a general rundown on business rescue, so in other words, if you're an agency and you're financially distressed and you want to understand what the business rescue process is about and how COBRA can assist, please join us on Mondays or Tuesdays. That's the general session. Otherwise, go to our website to have a look at the targeted webinars, those are the industry targeted webinars. So yeah, thanks for joining us today. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks to my panelists. Thanks all.
Thank you.